Hi, it's time for another verb of the day. Today's verb is dial. Let's take a moment to look at some of the definitions or the ways that we use this verb. The verb dial, for many people, are going to connect to this idea of making a phone call. So, in our modern times, when people use this verb, many times they are encouraging someone to initiate or to begin a phone call, either by touching a keypad or a touch screen, as it is now on many of our smartphones. A second way you might hear dial used is to mean to manipulate a device in order to operate it, regulate it, or select it. So, a little later, I'm going to have some pictures and we're going to look at the noun form of this word to help connect it. But stick with me here, and I think a deeper understanding of the second definition will come a little later in the video. You should know that dial is a regular verb. To make the progressive form of this verb, all I need to do is add ing to form dialing. The past tense and participle forms of this verb can be made by adding ed. Our base verb is dial, It ends with this voiced L sound. This means that my ed ending is just going to make a D sound, and I'm not going to add an extra syllable as I say it. It should sound like this: dialed, dialed. Okay. Now, there are actually many different phrasal verb meanings with this particular verb, so we're going to devote the majority of today's video looking at those phrasal verbs and looking at some examples. The first phrasal verb we'll discuss is to dial down. Generally, when people are using this phrasal verb, they're talking about decreasing the amount, the intensity, or the degree of some quality or characteristic. An example of this might be, we must dial down our workouts. I have barely been able to walk, right? So here we must dial down. This is a modal must. I'm expressing necessity, right? So, what I'm suggesting with this sentence is we need to decrease the intensity of our workouts. Maybe we shouldn't be lifting as heavy weights or doing as many repeated actions because, right? I'm in physical pain. I can hardly walk. Another phrasal verb you might encounter is dial in or dial into. This can have a number of different meanings. We're going to talk about four in today's video. The first way you hear dial in used is really to mean to connect by phone. So, an example of this might be Shelley can't attend the meeting, but she'll dial in. This she will dial in. That's an example of the simple future. I'm using will, making either a prediction or maybe this is meant as like a promise. And I feel like that's a pretty common thing to hear now with so many virtual meetings. Whether it's online or by phone, many times you're going to hear people say, "I'm dialing into," I'm connecting through the phone. That's all that they mean. A second way we could use dial in or dial into is to mean that we're inputting a particular number or set of numbers on a phone. So we're back to touching that keypad or touch screen, whatever type of phone we're using. So an example of this might be dial in the country code for the call to connect. Right? This is an example of an imperative. Someone is giving a command here, telling someone else what to do. So we need to input the country code. A third way we can use dial in or dial into is to mean to share or relay information by phone. You might think of this as sort of like call in. An example of this: if any of our viewers have new information, dial it in. Here's another imperative. So this might be encouraging people to interact, to communicate, call a particular number. Maybe there's some type of emergency that's ongoing and new information is being shared very quickly. A fourth way we can use dial in or dial into is to mean to achieve a particular setting. Or some type of configuration using a dial. There's that noun form of our word. And again, we'll look at some pictures of that a little bit later. An example of this might be I can't dial in the signal, I'm just getting static. So if you happen to be a person who still listens to the radio and listens to it not on your phone or not through a computer, this might be an action you've done where you've sort of adjusted the settings in order to locate a particular station. That's another way dial gets used. Now, let's continue talking about a few more phrasal verbs. The next one we're going to discuss is dial up. This can have a number of different meanings as well, and we're going to talk about four of them. The first way you might hear dial up used is just to mean to call someone on the phone. An example of this might be, we should dial up grandma and see what she says. Right? So in many ways, this has the same meaning as call. Right? It might be a little less common to hear someone say dial up, but this sentence is an example of another modal should. So we're giving advice here to someone. Maybe grandma is needed to settle some sort of dispute or argument. A second way you might hear dial up used is a little bit dated, but goodness, maybe 25 or more years ago, this was a common way that people would access internet service. They would use their computer to connect via the phone line, and so you would hear people say they're dialing up in order to connect to the internet. So an example of that, we dialed up each time we wanted to use the internet in 1997. So I think that's about the time my family first got internet access. And I would remember kind of this long, I won't do a good job making the noises, but if you're older like me, you've probably heard these. And if you're younger, you might just be thankful that the internet connects so quickly in 2023. Now, a third way you might hear dial up used is to refer to adjusting the control on some electrical device. So we might be increasing the sound, the light, the heat, something of that kind of nature. So, an example of this, dial up the volume, right? Someone's maybe telling you turn up the radio, turn up the stereo. With that, increase the volume. That's another example of the imperative. And I think I forgot to mention, we dialed up is an example of the simple past tense. I've got my time signal there, 1997. Now, the last way we could use dial up is sort of the opposite of dial down. Remember, we talked about decreasing intensity. So, dial up could be to increase the amount or the intensity, the degree of something. And I feel like I've heard this a lot while watching sports. Many announcers might say things like, the team dialed up their intensity in the second half, right? Seemed like they were giving greater effort, playing harder. That's what's meant by that. That's another example of the simple past tense there. Now, let's move on and talk about some words that are related to our verb dial. And as I mentioned earlier, we're going to talk about the noun form of this word. So I've got the exact same spelling and the exact same pronunciation. And when the word dial gets used as a noun, one way you might hear it used is to refer to a face. It's also called a flat plate with some type of scale and pointer in order to show some type of measurement. That could be for weight, maybe volume, pressure, compass direction, right? Something of that nature. So if you look at the bottom of the screen here, I'm kind of highlighting, right? A picture, an example of a dial, right? And this one's very tough to read. The picture's not very clear, but that could be kind of a pressure type of dial. So, an example of how you might hear this used in a sentence, what does the thermometer dial read? Right? Okay, so thermometer, talking about temperature there. Now, a second way you might hear dial used is to refer to essentially a very old phone. So, this was a disc that had numbered holes on it, and you would kind of press one and the number, right? And it'd press another, right? It was very slow. So, this is an example of what is sometimes called a rotary dial telephone. I had a rotary dial for a very long time growing up. I think my parents really liked it for some reason. They were kind of attached to it. But when kids came over to my house, they didn't know how to use my phone, and I always felt very embarrassed. So, again, my example sentence here is: have you ever used a rotary dial telephone? And again, this might be a function of age. If you're in your 20s, maybe not. But if you're in your 40s, 50s, or 60s or older, then you probably have used this older type of phone. Now, a third way that dial gets used as a noun is to refer to what's called either a plate or a disc that's on a radio, could be on a stove, a washing machine, some other type of equipment that's used to select a particular setting. If it's a radio, wavelength might be another way to kind of think of that. And again, I've got another picture here. This looks like someone's oven, right? And they're adjusting the dial. Maybe that's how they adjust the temperature. Okay, so another way you hear this used: a new sports show is coming to the radio dial, right? So they're kind of talking about the particular setting here for that. Now, I have one other word that I thought might be a little common to hear people use. This is very modern. A related verb you might hear is butt dial. Okay. And if you hear somebody use this, they are talking about unintentionally, which means not on purpose, calling someone from your mobile phone, and it's likely occurred because of your touch screen. Maybe you put it in your pocket and somehow it kind of connects, it initiates a call, even when you didn't mean to place a call. So, an example of this verb in a sentence might be: cops caught two thieves after one butt dialed 911 during the alleged break in. There have been a lot of headlines and stories like that. Sometimes people overhear things they maybe shouldn't if we've accidentally placed a phone call. Thanks so much for watching today's video. I hope you have a great day.